Hello and welcome to Risk at Work, Risk Connect's Thought Leadership web series. I'm Scott Fenstermaker, I'm VP of Digital Marketing. Today we're talking about enabling agile and resilient third-party relationships, and we probably could not have been met at a better time to talk about this subject. I know that everybody is feeling the pressure right now put on global supply chain. Everybody is feeling pressure on price pressure and pressure on margins as commodities around the world increase in price. And so there really isn't a better time for us to talk about what it means to put a process in place at your organization that delivers to you systematic, actionable intelligence, not just about individual members of your third-party portfolio, which we tend to focus most of our effort on, but on the broader context of third-party and supply chain at large. And we have exactly the right person to be speaking with us today on this topic. I am thrilled to be able to introduce him. Before I bring him on, just a couple of quick housekeeping points. If you have questions for our guest during the course of this webinar today, please put that question into the questions field of the GoToWebinar portal. If we don't get to that question during the course of the webinar, we will reach out to you individually and get you an answer from our guest. Also, if you indicated when you signed up that you would like CPE credit for this webinar, please pay attention to your email inbox. After we're done here today, we're going to send you a short quiz. You fill that out, you send that back to us, and we will follow up with your CPE credit. All right, I am thrilled to have back the GRC pundit from GRC 2020 Research, Michael Rasmussen. Many of you listening to this podcast today will know Michael probably from having him help you put together GRC architecture and GRC processes to help your organization deal with uncertainty. He's got 28 years of experience in the field helping companies do just that. He's a sought-after keynote speaker, author, and advisor. I happen to know that firsthand because we sought after him, and that's how we have him here today. I am pleased to welcome back Michael Rasmussen. Michael, how are you doing, sir?
It is an absolute pleasure to be here today, Scott. I'm looking forward to this.
I'm looking forward to it too. So I know I've seen the material that you brought. You've brought a ton of information for us. So I'm going to ask to get right in. And why don't you share it with us, Michael?
Certainly. I've used these slides in some of our previous webinars we've done, but I'm going to apply these in a specific third-party context. Today's modern organization is what I've characterized before and today as navigating chaos. The modern organization is barraged with a variety of regulations, laws and regulations. It could be new laws, regulations, change laws, enforcement actions. A variety of these impact our third-party relationships. Things like US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, UK Bribery Act, CEPM2 in France. You've got UK Modern Slavery Act, California's Transparency and Supply Chains Act, Australia's Slavery Act. You've got Germany's Corporations Due Diligence Act, which requires extensive due diligence on third-party relationships. And so you got a lot of regulatory pressures that are constantly changing that impact the business and its third-party relationships. But then you got a changing risk environment. Look at geopolitical risk around us, as you've already referenced, Scott. This year we've seen so much in disruptions of supply chains and prices and things. But you also have a changing business itself, and with that, changing third-party relationships. And you have to keep all this change in sync. The challenge is that today's organization is the extended enterprise. You walk down the halls of the corporation, you sit in conference rooms, and half the people you come across and you interact with within your business are not traditional employees, but third parties. The contractors, the consultants, the outsourcers, the service providers, the temporary workers. And everything's changing so quickly that today's organization is definitely navigating chaos, especially with the extended enterprise of third-party relationships. Now, the physicist Friedrich Capra stated, the more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they're interconnected and interdependent. The physicist here is talking about biological ecosystems, but he might as well have been talking about risk today in the extended enterprise. That is an interconnected risk environment. And we have to be able to see these relationships, these interconnections of risk, well, IT security risk, not just within our business and our operations, but in our third parties. And just as we are supporting the hybrid remote work environments in most of our companies, our third parties are as well in their home offices. And so it's this cascading area of risk that goes from the risk itself into the organization, but into its third parties. And we have to be able to see these complex relationships. The English poet, John Donne said, "No man is an island entire of himself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." If you replace that word man with organization, you have the modern organization. No organization is an island entire of itself. Every organization is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. It is an interconnected business. It is the extended enterprise. Today's modern organization is comprised of vendors, suppliers, outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, brokers, agents, dealers, intermediaries, and more, temporary workers and more, all sorts. And their risk issues are your risk issues. And you've got to be able to be resilient and agile in today's complicated and extended enterprise of third-party relationships. And that's not easy. You look at the different types of risk involved in third-party relationships. There can be code of conduct risk, dealing with supplier and vendor code of conduct. There's the operational resiliency and viability. And we have so much focus on resiliency this year with the war in Ukraine and its disruption to supply chains, but also services, because there's a lot of outsourced service providers and data centers in Ukraine. We've had a lot of resiliency issues. You got privacy. You know, what is being, when it comes to things like GDPR, California CCPA and more, what are these privacy concerns that extend across third-party relationships? I've been working with a large EU bank. They're looking at having and requiring everybody in their data centers to go through the same policies and training as their employees do. The key thing is most of the people, 90-some% of the people in their data centers are not employees. They're outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, and they're looking at requiring each of those individuals of these third parties to go through the same policies and training that employees do on privacy. You got information security risks. Or do they have the right security? You look back at like the Target breach from several years back. You know, the doorway into that was an HVAC vendor, a third party, a heating and air conditioning vendor had a connection to the Target network for environmental monitoring. This heating and air conditioning vendor was hacked into and compromised, and the hacker is able to connect to the Target network through this heating and air conditioning vendor and compromise point of sale systems across Target, stealing millions of credit card numbers, including 2 of my own. Information security issues. But these information security issues are very complicated now because those third parties that you often work with, they're supporting a remote home office and hybrid work environments too. And the security gets extended across a wider range of things. You look at anti-bribery and corruption risks, US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, UK Bribery Act, SEP and in France. You know, in the majority of FCPA enforcement, anti-bribery and corruption enforcement, involves some type of third party and that is implicated in the bribery and corruption. You've got ESG, formerly corporate social responsibility and sustainability. I just spent a week in London last week, and environmental social governance, ESG, was the hottest topic. You cannot address ESG without looking at the third-party relationships. The latest SEC climate disclosure requirements, you know, the level 3 on that, it requires extensive due diligence on the environment and climate disclosures across your supply chain. You've got Germany's Corporations Due Diligence Act, which requires extensive, not just initial, but ongoing and continuous due diligence of third-party relationships in your supply chain across environmental, social, and governance aspects, ESG, And there's extensive enforcement and monitoring that are going to be required to address those requirements. And organizations only have, looks like 7 more months before the initial set have to start complying with that. Lots of interest in that, but you have a corresponding EU directive that's going to require similar legislation in every member country of the EU. And this is big. It's going to be bigger than GDPR globally. But then you have the environmental aspects specifically that I already touched on, like the SEC climate disclosures, social accountability and human rights. One of my greatest projects I spent some time on for a few years was sitting on the social accountability advisory board of a global Fortune 100 brand, dealing with 5,000 suppliers and 20,000 facilities in their global supply chain on their supply chain code of conduct on social accountability, dealing with child labor, forced labor, also known as prison labor, working hours, wage and hour, and health and safety across 20,000 facilities with 5,000 suppliers, 20,000 facilities in their global supply chain, social accountability and human rights. And in that, you got things like US conflict minerals, part of the Dodd-Frank Act, where you have to trace tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, what's known as 3TG, down to the source smelter and mine to see if they come from the Democratic Republic of the Congo or 9 surrounding countries known for crimes against humanity. Social accountability. You got California's Transparency in Supply Chains Act, UK Modern Slavery Act, Australia's Slavery Act, and more on this social accountability and human rights angle in third-party relationships. Health and safety, sanctions, that's the big word for all of us right now as we deal with all the fallout, what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and dealing with sanctions in our supply chains and third-party relationships, which also gets into import and export compliance and traceability of materials. And I'm sure we can add a lot more here. But what's important to understand is that the little things matter. Leonardo da Vinci said, realize that everything connects to everything else. Let's take a reflection on chaos theory. Chaos theory, what we call the butterfly effect, is the theory where the butterfly's wings in the Netherlands makes tiny atmospheric changes as it flutters its wings that has this cascading and growing snowball effect that can influence the development path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Those little things matter. And we need to be able to manage and understand that. This is very evident in this next slide. I do with my third-party risk by design workshops around the world. And right before COVID started, I'm going back to February of 2020, I did these 4 workshops in a period of a month. New York, San Francisco, Dallas, and London, all on my third-party risk management by design workshops. And I presented this slide in each of those workshops to organizations at two different organizations at 2 different workshops, one in San Francisco, one in London, said the exact same thing on this slide. They said, great analogy, we like the slide, but the reality, it's more than just the trees in the trees in the forest. It's also the leaves and the branches. We need to be able to see the details of that risk. If we're outsourcing that to, say we have a large outsourcing contract, and we might have 100 different service level agreements with an Accenture or a Wipro or Tata or whoever it might be. We might have one relationship with 100 different contracts or service level agreements in that relationship. We need to know that 70 of them touch like GDPR information and 30 do not. They said it's the leaves and the branches that matter, not just the trees in the forest. We need to be able to see the leaves and the branches, going back, the butterfly's wings, those little things matter. We need to be able to see the leaves and the branches and how they are part of the tree and how the tree is part of the forest. We need to see that individual third-party risk and all the little components and details of that risk and the interconnectedness of third-party risks on the organization. Now, the way a lot of organizations have gone about looking at things like risk and resiliency and agility in third-party relationships reminds me of the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. This was a sprawling mansion that was built in the 1800s. It cost $5.5 million to build in the 1800s. And now that's one very expensive house today when you calculate inflation. It took 38 years to build, and it had 147 different builders, but no design, no blueprint, no architect. At the end of the day, it has staircases that go up or down to nowhere, doors that open to 20-foot drops, or doors that open to walls. It's got 10,000 windows, skylights that are in floors and not ceilings. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I just described a lot of organizations' third-party risk programs, that they've got a fractured mess, that over the last 38 years, they've had 147 different builders of third-party risk management looking at their little piece of it and not the big picture. That's the challenge. I was just dealing with a very large healthcare system in the United States. And they're looking at trying to bring together an integrated third-party risk strategy because procurement's doing one thing with one software provider, IT security is doing another thing with another software provider for third-party risk. And then corporate compliance and ethics is doing something, but with manual processes, with documents, spreadsheets, and emails. And continuity and resiliency and risk management is doing something else. And they're looking and saying, we have 4 different solutions or 4 different departments managing aspects of third-party risk, and they're going in different directions, and nobody has a complete risk profile of the vendor or supplier. What happens if procurement on financial viability score on, like, let's use a simple stoplight diagram of risk, red, yellow, green. Let's say procurement scores that as a yellow, moderate risk. IT security scores IT security risk in that relationship, the yellow, moderate risk. Resiliency and risk management and continuity scores it as a yellow. And then back over to compliance and ethics, looking at conduct and behavior in the third-party relationship scores it as yellow. Do we actually have enough yellows that in aggregate risk exposure, it's actually a red? That's something to think about. When you manage third-party risk with these little blinders on, just looking at a little narrow piece of the pie, we're not seeing the whole pie. And that is a huge, huge issue. I was talking to a global major automobile manufacturer that's looking at the same thing. They're restructuring their whole third-party risk program. I've actually worked with a lot of the pharmaceutical firms, at least 4 major pharmaceutical firms in the last few years. And each of them are working on a very comprehensive third-party risk program to bring that whole picture together, not just pieces of the pie that cross anti-bribery and corruption, information security, information systems quality, privacy and third-party relationships, animal welfare, business continuity and resiliency, including concentration risk and material risk, health, safety, and the environment, compliance to promotional practices, compliance to bioethics, product quality and safety, including clinical trials, human biological sample management and pharmacovigilance in third-party relationship, strategic sourcing, intellectual property management, ESG, performance and contractual, global security, and fourth-party risks across all those domains. All those pieces of the puzzle in at least 4 major pharmaceutical firms are coming together into one complete integrated third-party risk program. We need to be able to see that. We need to step back and design, like these firms I'm talking about, an integrated third-party risk program that crosses different departments and functions. But the way a lot of organizations are dealing with this is what we call the inevitability of failure, because we're dealing with manual processes that deal with lots of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. I was just doing some research on a value study program that I'm working on that does an economic model, and I work on a lot of business cases for organizations as well as value studies for vendors like Risk Connect, measuring the economic value of a solution. And I was doing some benchmarking across some of the companies I interviewed and found out that it typically takes 10 to 20 hours of initial due diligence and assessments and back and forth, 10 to 20 hours of internal staff time to onboard a vendor or supplier in a lot of organizations on average. Some, it might be less, like an hour. Some might take 100 hours if it's a very large relationship to onboard. 10 to 20 hours on average per relationship to onboard, and when it's with manual processes. You bring that in with automation, and that gets down to about 2 hours because you have technology that makes sure things don't slip through the cracks and that questions get answered, and all this back and forth and chasing things to consider. So what I'm hearing, failure in third-party governance and risk management comes about when organizations have growing risks and regulatory concerns in third-party relationships with inadequate resources, particularly when they're managing with documents, spreadsheets, and emails. There's interconnected third-party risks that are being managed in silos that are not connected, which means we have silos of third-party risk oversight. We have lots of document and email-centric approaches, scattered and non-integrated legacy third-party risk technologies doing different pieces of the puzzle, processes that focus on onboarding and not continuous monitoring and offboarding throughout the life cycle, inadequate processes to manage change, and not looking at overall third-party performance in context of risk and compliance. These are a lot of challenges organizations are facing and things that we need to look at and figure out, how do we address this in today's extended enterprise of the modern organization? And that's where we're moving from a past to a future. Where the past, where there's a lot of documents, spreadsheets, and emails and siloed solutions, to a future of looking at how do we leverage an integrated platform like Risk Connect or others that can manage the entire process from multiple departments' perspectives. Think about it. We had in the area of CRM, client relationship management, we had CRM systems. Client relationship management systems have been around for, gosh, what, 30 years where they first started to come in. What changed was we've actually been managing client relationships since the dawn of business. And so we've always managed client relationships. But in the 70s and 80s, the world became flat. There was a lot of transition where people would not start and stop their careers in one organization. They'd move about organizations. And it was hard to have good information on the client. And sales had their view of the client, marketing had their view of the client, and service and support had their view of the client. So CRM systems came in and to change that and say, we're going to have one software to manage client relationships that sales can use and marketing can use and the service and call center and support can use. And when that salesperson goes to call on the client, they can see all the calls and service requests and everything else that they had, so that they were going into that relationship informed and not going to be like hit upside the head because they weren't aware of all the issues. And if somebody has the right contact information, all be kept current. CRM systems fix that problem. We need the same type of focus now on the third party side, the other part of the business, not the client relationships, but our business partners, suppliers, and vendors, where procurement and IT security and corporate compliance and ethics, resiliency can all be able to see into the third party relationship into a common platform and system. And so that's the future of this third party risk management. Moving from the document, spreadsheets, and emails, using CRM as an example of what we're trying to achieve. Past, there's a lot of responsibilities, to a future where there's greater accountability in this area. So I define third-party risk management leveraging the definition of GRC found in the OSEG GRC capability model. I actually prefer to call it third-party GRC management over third-party risk, because we're not just trying to manage risk relationships, we're trying to govern these relationships. Think about it. So I define this area as third-party GRC, or risk management, is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives, that's the governance function, address uncertainty, that's risk management, and act with integrity, that's compliance, in and across its third-party relationships. So third-party GRC, third-party risk management, is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and act with integrity in and across its third-party relationships. Let's follow the flow here. Governance of third parties. This is here so the organization may reliably achieve objectives in the relationship and align those with the overall objectives of the organization. We have a relationship for a purpose. We don't go just say, hey, I feel like having a vendor relationship. Let's spin the internet out there and see which vendor it lands on. I'm going to start a relationship with you. That's not how it works. We define a relationship for a business purpose. What's that business purpose? What's the objectives in that relationship? Why are we having this relationship? It's there for a purpose. That governance sets the context we can manage uncertainty and risk and resiliency in. To understand risk exposure and mitigate uncertainty issues and loss in third-party relationships that impact the organization, that's the third-party risk management aspect. Then that flows into compliance to ensure that third parties align and meet the values, ethics, policies, regulatory and contractual obligations of the organization. But as we've referenced in the title of today's webinar, in dealing with agility and resiliency in third-party relationships. Now, this is all part of what I call risk management. Good risk management means we're going to be resilient, but also agile. Resilience is that capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. Agility is the ability to move quickly and easily, the ability to think and understand quickly. Let's use the analogy that I'm running down the street. And I'm running along and I trip over a pothole or a curb. Resilience is how quickly can I get back up and start running again? I had a risk event, I tripped. How quickly can I start running again? Agility is to be able to see what's coming at me. What are those risks? To understand the environment, to see that pothole or the curb and be able to leap over it or run around it. and leverage it maybe to my greater advantage. But that's the idea of agility. Good third-party risk should make us both resilient and agile. We should be able to identify risk issues in our relationships, like redundancy and our supply chain issues and things like that because of geopolitical risks like the war in Ukraine, and be able to address that. Resiliency is the ability to recover quickly from third-party risk issues. Agility is to be able to do the scenario analysis and see where are the weak spots, what's coming at us, how is risk developing in different parts of the world that can impact our supply chain and our outsourcing and service provider relationships. What are the different scenarios where that can play out, and how can we address this and be able to be agile and understand what's coming at us to prepare the organization? We need to be agile and resilient in our third-party risk programs. This requires that we bring together both left brain and right brain thinking on third-party risk. Left brain is that logical and structured thinking about risk management. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle said, "It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts." He's right. But on the flip side, we need right brain risk thinking on third-party risk, the creative, imaginative thinking about risk. Alvin Toffler said, "You can use all the quantitative data you can get, but you still have to distrust it and use your own intelligence and judgment." I'm saying in context of third-party risk, but also operational enterprise risk, we need both left brain and right brain thinking. Both are right. We need our structured thinking and our risk models and our and scenarios and everything else. But we also need to be able to think about creatively about what outside the box. How can this scenario unfold? How can developments between Russia and the Ukraine work out 6 months from now? How can we prepare the organization from that? For that, we need both left brain and right brain thinking to be agile and resilient in our third-party risks. This means that we have to get a lot of the departments of the organization working together. They're often going in different directions. Like I mentioned, that hospital, that huge healthcare system that had procurement doing one thing, corporate compliance and ethics another, IT security doing another, and resiliency and continuity and risk management still doing another. 4 different threads and strands going in different directions for third-party risk. And now they're starting to work together cohesively on a third-party risk strategy across these different departments and functions. So my question for you today, what is your approach to third-party risk management? Is it this distributed third-party risk? We have disconnected departments managing third-party risk relationships in different ways with little or no collaboration with other departments? Or is it what I call a federated third-party risk management strategy, where there's an integrated approach like that healthcare system, like the automobile manufacturer, like those pharmaceutical and life sciences firms I mentioned, where there's an integrated approach that balances third-party risk management, centralization with distributed participation and collaboration. This means that we have a top-down strategy of what is our third-party risk management strategy, what departments are involved, like procurement, ESG, operational resiliency, to corporate compliance and ethics and IT security, and all these different departments and functions that have some vested interest in third-party risk management. How do they work together? What are the third-party management processes and life cycle for third-party risk management? We'll get into that in just a few slides. And what's the information technology architecture that can support and deliver this? It means that we need to understand the value and objectives of the relationship. Is why do we have this relationship in the first place? But also the risks to the relationship. We need to bring both those together. In today's complex economy, our suppliers, distributors, vendors, outsourcers, service providers, subcontractors, agents, and other third parties play an absolutely critical role in your business success. It's too complex to manage without an integrated strategy that includes people, process, and technology. The goal is to protect and grow value by establishing a capability to see your entire third-party landscape with real-time information about external and internal events that may change risk profiles and impact performance of these relationships. We need to be able to identify these relationships and where they're at, monitor them, while we onboard them, but also continuously, and go against like external databases like politically exposed persons lists, watch lists, sanction lists, IT security ratings, financial and viability ratings, ESG ratings, reputation and brand lists, negative news and adverse media. We need to assess these third-party relationships and do surveys and questionnaires and assessments and score them, and then reevaluate these relationships on a regular basis. Now let's look at the third-party risk life cycle. It starts with ongoing context monitoring. On an ongoing basis and separate from monitoring of individual relationships, we need the big perspective. It's the process of monitoring the external risk, regulatory, and business environments, as well as the internal business environment, to put context to how we understand third-party risks. The purpose of this is to identify opportunities as well as risks and regulatory requirements that are evolving and impacts the overall third-party management program, not just the individual relationships. There's a variety of regulatory, environmental, economic, geopolitical risk, and internal business factors that can affect the success or failure of any given business relationship, as well as the range of relationships. So we need to be able to have an ability to be able to monitor the environment and look for developments that include potential for natural disasters and other disruptions, commodity availability and pricing, industry developments, and geopolitical risks. And 2022 is a great poster year for dealing with geopolitical risk management. This also involves monitoring relevant legal and regulatory environments in corresponding jurisdictions to identify changes that can impact the business and its extended enterprise. It moves to third-party identification onboarding. This is the collection of processes aimed at automating a standard, objective approach for identifying third parties to work with, onboarding them to the collection of third-party data, and conducting appropriate due diligence. So we identify and onboard third parties, identifying the purpose of the relationship and what third parties can support this particular relationship we're looking for, qualification of a third party and initial screening, contracting and negotiation, and final registration of the third party and onboarding. There's a lot of depth there. We can spend a whole hour webinar on each of these 7 elements. So I'm just gonna have to fly through this at a high level. Then you have third-party communications and attestations. These are the set of ongoing processes to manage the communications and interactions of the third party throughout the relationship's lifecycle. These are done on a periodic, such as annual basis, or when certain risk conditions are triggered in between periodic assessments. And these communications and attestations can include policy communications reminders like supply chain and vendor code of conduct, training, attestations, self-assessments, and like surveys and reporting. And then you get into the third-party monitoring and assessment. This stage includes the array of processes to continuously monitor the third-party relationship over its life cycle in the organization. These activities are the ones typically done within the organization to monitor and assess the third-party relationship on an ongoing basis. Issue reporting and resolution. The best laid plans of mice and men will fail. We will have issues and incidents internally to the organization, but also in our third parties. How do we identify and respond and resolve them? Performance monitoring of the relationship. It's not just risk monitoring, but it's also performance monitoring. The service level agreements. Is this third-party relationship delivering the value that we're expecting from it? But then there's the risk and compliance monitoring and ongoing due diligence. And there's also audits and inspections. We all have, or we should have, those right to audit clauses in our contracts, right? Well, how do we execute those? That Fortune 100 company where I sat on the Social Accountability Advisory Board that had 20,000 facilities in their global supply chain, risk scored every facility on our stoplight diagram, red, yellow, green. Red level facilities that had a high risk of social accountability issues like child labor, forced labor, working hours, wage and hour, health and safety issues. High risk facilities had to have an on-site inspection and audit every year. Moderate risk facilities, the yellow level facilities, had to have an on-site inspection or audit every 2 years. Low risk facilities, the green facilities, were randomly sampled for on-site inspections and audits. So out of 20,000 facilities, maybe 15,000 of them were green level, and then they randomly sampled a couple hundred of them for on-site inspections every year. That moves also to forms and approvals. This is the set of internal processes to collect and report information and route things for approval in the context of third-party relationships, such as new vendor supplier request forms, gifts, hospitality, and entertainment forms, political and charitable contributions, and facilitated payment forms. And then we have overall metrics and reporting, which are the processes to gather metrics and report on third-party relationships at the relationship level or in aggregate, and third-party reevaluation. This is the process in place to evaluate, maintain, renew, and offboard relationships. So it's the renewal of contracts in the relationship, but at some point we need to say goodbye to a relationship. How do we say goodbye? And that's the offboarding and retirement of a relationship. And that's a lot of times where places break down. There's more maturity in that onboarding side, and we lose maturity in that ongoing monitoring and assessment area. And a lot of organizations completely fail at the offboarding and saying goodbye to third-party relationships. That needs to be corrected. We need to have a solid third-party information architecture where we can see all this information contextually. We can understand the objectives of the relationship, the risks to achieving those objectives, the controls we put in place to mitigate the risks and to be able to reliably achieve the objectives in the relationship, the management of the issues that can point to where controls are failing in the relationship, where there's risk issues that are growing the relationship, or we might miss objectives. The roles, who's the relationship owner? Who's the subject matter expert on a particular risk? What policies govern the relationship, like supply chain and vendor code of conduct? Are there other policies like privacy policies and things that govern the relationship? What are the regulatory obligations that impact the relationship? Where in the organization does the relationship report in the organizational structure? We need a solid information architecture, like what I mentioned, what CRM systems did for client relationship management. We need third-party risk management systems that can do the same across these different departments and functions and catalog and map and show these relationships so that we have higher quality risk information, be able to optimize our processes, and better allocate our capital and understand where our risk exposure is the greatest in third parties, improve effectiveness so there's less things slipping through cracks and being caught off guard by a surprise. And in this era of ESG, protect the reputation and brand of the organization while being more efficient in reducing the costs and over ultimate risk exposure. This means we need an information architecture that is highly agile, what I call agile and cognitive GRC technologies that can adapt to the organization and deliver value, that can be able to manage a lot of distributed, disconnected third-party data points from the contracts to the transactions to due diligence and monitoring geopolitical risk events, assessments of relationships, attestations to supply chain and vendor code of conduct and other attestations, monitoring capabilities and delivery of the relationships, training, disclosures like gifts, entertainment, hospitality, and political contributions and all that can impact payments to third parties, performance of the relationships, quality and service delivery, audits and inspections, monitoring against service level agreements, negative news, sanctions, watch lists, politically exposed persons, and more. Taking all these different elements of process and data points, which might go to external databases, understand these and map them together, contextually analyze relationships, and build out action items from that. It means we need strong third-party risk technology to deliver management reporting. I was talking to one firm that was spending 200 hours to build a report for the board of directors. Like in the United States, with the OZC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, they require board-level oversight of vendor risk. Now, if it's taking you 200 hours to build that board report on third-party risk for the board, you're not managing risk, you're reacting to risk. As you tabulate and aggregate all this assessment and stuff from documents, spreadsheets, and emails over 12 months, and you find out that you had risk issues that started 11 months ago that have grown since then. That's not managing risk, that's reacting to risk. That's trying to put out fires. You need good dashboards and insight that can show you risk as it is today across your relationships, but also within each individual relationship. You need a strong audit trail, accountability, and system of record of who did what, when, how, and why. What did we assess on that third party on what date and time? What was the due diligence result of that? Was it documented? Who did that? What was the findings? Workflow and tasks so things don't get missed or slip through the cracks. Good collaboration and enforcement and monitoring, integration into the environment like the SAP systems and Oracle systems to gather data on third parties and suppliers and payment activities and transactions and so forth. All this comes together so we can deliver on agile and resilient third-party risk management. We're aware of our relationships, but we're aware of the risks across these relationships. We're aware because we have an integrated third-party risk management approach with a common information architecture, like CRM systems for clients we have for third-party risks. So we're not just seeing little slices of the pie, but we're seeing the whole risk pie and how it all comes together and complete risk exposure for the organization. We're more aware. This allows us to align and work together where procurement and IT security and corporate compliance and ethics and risk and resiliency can all work together in a common platform for third-party risk, which enables us to be more responsive to risk issues and contain them when they're still small, and then more agile to see what's coming at us and what's developing so we can prepare the organization for risk in the future and hopefully avoid it and prevent it, to be more resilient and recover from risk events in our third-party relationships like our supply chain, and do all this with our efficient use of human capital and financial capital resources. So with that, I've got some contact information here, and I'm going to turn this over to Scott to see what type of questions he has for me.
Thank you very much, Michael. Your material is always comprehensive, and when you said earlier on that you could do an entire webinar on each one of those points, I was reflecting that that's absolutely true. And so I regret that we only have so much time to spend here today, but I would love to have been able to gone into each one of those on a separate webinar and actually build that out.
I have 7 stages of the supplier life. I do a whole webinar on each of those.
I know, right? It's that might actually be worth exploring, but I'll try and hone down some questions as best I can here. One question that occurred to me as you were speaking early on, you were talking about the a couple of the corporations that you've been helping recently, and I was just curious, kind of off the top of your head, what are the things that are making corporations take the step of reaching out to you right now? Like, what was the inciting incident where they came to you and said, okay, I think we need to get our third-party risk systems much more comprehensive? Was it the supply chain issues that they're having right now? Was it more than that? Why are people coming to you right now for this?
Well, it's increased regulation is one aspect of it. ESG is a huge aspect. I mean, I just was in London last week and I had so many conversations on ESG and how it impacts the supply chain and third-party relationships. But the big one this year is dealing with resiliency, and how do we deal with resiliency when the extended enterprise, the modern organization is not defined by brick and mortar walls and traditional employees. The modern organization is a complex web of third-party relationships. And geopolitical risk, like the war in Ukraine and everything else, has really disrupted a lot of organizations in different ways, directly and indirectly. And indirectly, it could be through the huge rise in gas prices and things we've seen this year, and other aspects. There's a lot of unrest right now. And so resiliency is like one of the biggest things I'm dealing with, not just resiliency within the organization, but in the extended enterprise. And you look at the different resiliency regulations out there. And I have a whole slide on this, but I didn't put it in this deck. But you look at the United Kingdom's FCA, Bank of England, PRA, their operational resilience guidance. You look at the EU DORA, Digital Operation Resilience Act. You look for Basel and the Bank for National Settlements guidance on operational resilience. And you look at the United States OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency operational resilience guidance. Every one of them touches on third-party relationships, because you cannot be a resilient organization without looking at the extended enterprise.
It's absolutely true, and your point on ESG a little bit earlier is kind of takes that out to the next level. I don't even know if a lot of risk representatives in the United States are grasping yet that scope 3 reporting is not your vendors, it's the vendors of your vendors, right? So now that the extended enterprise is now extending a layer out further than people are used to thinking, and this scales over tens of thousands of vendors for a company. I don't understand sometimes how people think that they're going to be able to be in compliance with that without some kind of technological help. Do you know what I'm saying?
That's right.
I want to stay on the contextual monitoring for a second. External monitoring, your first point in the TPR lifecycle processes that you went through in your slides, because that one seems crucial right now. I have a feeling that when we tend to get myopic in this area, we tend to focus on our attestations, our questionnaires, and we tend to say, okay, I've got my supplier by supplier information, and that's really I've checked the box. That's all I need. If I had to place a bet, or if I had to guess at this, I would guess that the external context monitoring that you were talking about is the part of this that people are least familiar with, comfortable with, because it's almost a little bit vague by definition. You're kind of asking, okay, what is the entire context, geopolitical and so forth? And I think people would reply, well, our group reads the newspapers just like everybody else. What else do you really expect us to do, right? I'm curious what it looks like in companies who do this well. What should good external context monitoring look like? How should that information be gathered? Where does it come from? How is it talked about in a structured way, and not just, oh well, I saw a headline that that Russia is amassing on the Ukrainian border, and I guess we'll go from there. Can you fill in some gaps for me on that?
Yeah, it's going to be require good intelligence first off. In looking at not just newspapers, but you can get geopolitical risk feeds with analysis from the Economist Intelligence Unit. They provide daily risk briefings on like over 140 different countries around the world, to Maplecroft, to IJET, Eurasia Group, and more. They geopolitical risk services, but then there's also other services that can provide you regulatory developments and things like that as well. But it's be able to take in a lot of information and say, hey, here's what things are looking like by a region of the world, like continent, like Asia Pac and things, but also down to specific countries. Here's some early indicators, like early warning signs. How can this scenario play out? What are the different scenarios? I mean, early in the days where we see Russia like giving hints at invading Ukraine, good, strong organizations are going to go through how can this play out and impact our supply chain and our third-party relationships and our business specifically. And that's going to go through scenario modeling. It could be a non-issue and where it doesn't even happen. It could be something that, Russia invades, quickly takes over and rules Ukraine. What do we do then? What's the scenario then? It could be a long drawn out war that we're seeing now, or a variety of other things. But it's important that we take good risk information and build out scenarios and say, here's one way it can play out. Here's another way it can play out. Here's another way it can play out. And how does each of these scenarios impact our extended enterprise, our third-party relationships? And what can we best do to prepare to be resilient? Does it mean start sourcing something from another part of the world, or moving things about? Maybe it means more investment. Maybe things are doing well in a country, and so the news and information we're getting is that this is a good thing to do, is to move stuff in this area.
When organizations are now consolidating these risk silos that you were talking about, right? So IT, GRC, and procurement, and all of these guys. How is that typically coming together? Is this and especially with regard to leadership as well? Do you see things coming together under a CRO who would typically ask for a cadence where these types of geopolitical risks are discussed, or external risks are discussed frequently and regularly? Who ends up being fundamentally accountable most times, and what does it look like in terms of creating ongoing discussion from among these different groups?
Accountability is hard to pin down. At one level, there's accountability in the relationship owner of the relationship. But that also boils up because that relationship is just a piece in a puzzle to a larger business objective where there's accountability at that level too. But then you have risk accountability at maybe subject matter expert levels. And so there's multiple accountabilities involved in this, and they need to start working together. And some of that, if it's a significant risk issue, and because we don't have the resources to do this in detail for every type of risk out there, but significant risks in our supply chain and third-party relationships means that we should probably be going through tabletop exercises. And how can this play out and get these different people that have accountabilities and subject matter expertise to collaborate and discuss things together?
It occurs to me the being able to call out, context monitoring versus monitoring of the individual players. It occurs to me that that might be two different I mean, there are obviously different domains, but there's also two different styles of risk too, because what in individual, when you're monitoring individual third-party suppliers, the individual providers, if you have a risk, it's typically a risk to one of them, right? And so it can be more independent from the other suppliers you have. The external context monitoring is arguably just as, if not more important, because that is where you would pick up on risks that would hit multiple suppliers at the same
Yeah.
time, getting everything to move. And that would create your long tail risk, right?
Yep.
So does that, um, are companies typically missing a big portion of that, or do you think that they do it, that by and large companies do an adequate job of taking care to watch the entire context and not just supplier by supplier? Do you know what I'm saying? How do you find companies doing at that?
I find a lot of the maturity and a lot of growth that still needs to happen.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Um,
when it comes to context monitoring, there's context of the broad program, which we've been talking about, but there's context within each individual relationship too. And looking at politically exposed persons, that could be like FCPA, UK Bribery Act, those type of things,
mhm.
sanction lists, watch lists, vessels data for like dealing with, global shipping and things like that. And um, you've got negative news and adverse media, reputation and brand lists, ESG lists, financial viability ratings, IT security ratings. I mean, these are all different types of databases out there collecting information on third parties that we can go against to look at, context monitoring of an individual relationship.
Mhm. Let's talk a little bit about the technology angle of this, because you called that out. It seems rightly so. It seems more and more obvious that, and I like your analogy to the CRM systems, right? If you look at a modern enterprise in trying to keep track of individual relationships without a CRM system, it seems ludicrous. And from all of the information you pointed out needs to be consolidated in the third party world, it's hard to imagine people trying to do it without some kind of technology. Tell me a little bit about how these things are architectured out within the technology. You've written on this before, where you have different domains and they're subsegmented. But if you've got these connected right in a piece of technology, what connection should you be able to see in front of you? What should you be able to tell easily? Paint a picture for me about how this looks when you've got it all together and properly architectured.
You should have different roles that have interests. And you might have an overall third-party risk program manager that wants to see the big picture and aggregate risk across relationships and regions. You might have the relationship owner who wants to see risk, in that relationship itself, whether it's bribery and corruption risk or IT security risk or financial viability. You got risk by subject area, where procurement wants to see, the range of, which of the vendors and suppliers third parties are dealing with that have financial viability issues that might go bankrupt or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
IT security is going to be looking at more of the IT security view of things. And so people have their different pieces of the pie as well as perspectives. It could be by individual relationship, it could be by subject matter, it could be by region of the world, and so many different pieces.
I see. Well, we're coming up on it. I wanted to finish off on a question about the future,
Okay.
because you've written about GRC 4.0 and 5.0, right? Agility comes in GRC 4.0. It's kind of the conversation that we're having now. And then you've written about 5.0 being what you call cognitive GRC, which sounds like it would probably have a lot more AI leveraging. Sounds like it would have a lot more perhaps prescriptive analytics. I'd like you to tell me a little bit about where you think, with relation to third-party risk, what you think the future of GRC is going to look like when we reach that cognitive stage, and what should technology be able to provide, and what should third-party risk organizations look like kind of under that future picture?
Well, it's about sourcing a lot of information. I mentioned a lot of different databases and things like that. And so there's the whole natural language processing and being able to, and machine learning and predictive analytics and robotic process automation that can take in all these different data sources and understand these, map these contextually, and give us intelligence information and feed them to the right person, and to be able to monitor how things are developing and how suppliers are performing and how does this impact with our risk environment and do predictive analytics and things on that. So there's a lot that artificial intelligence and cognitive technologies can deliver in this space. In the area of natural language processing, I'm seeing a lot of organizations, and I've had a lot of conversations on this in the last month, look for things like natural language processing, where I'm like in the ESG context right now. Here is my values and what I believe is the right commitment to the environment, social, and governance, ESG. Here's my policies. Here's what our organization believes and states. Now, bring in the vendor's policies or suppliers' policies and have the machine read them and note the difference and tell me, where does that third party, where do they not align with what I'm saying my values are?
There was so much on this one of your final slides. There was so much information going into the top of that funnel. It would seem almost futile to try and be able to derive intelligence from all of that information without some kind of help. It seems like this is kind of an obvious application of machine learning or some other structures to be able to turn what's going to end up being a vast amount of information into actionable intelligence. Is that the case?
Yes, it is. Yep. And that's where you need a good information and technology architecture, like what RiskConnect delivers. I mean, you're built on the force.com platform. So you have a lot of integration capabilities to be able to take in those data sources.
Yes, indeed. And I'm not trying to be opportunistic here, but I think that wraps up our time here today, Michael. So I'm very happy to have left that on the RiskConnect answer, but I was really not trying to land it just so precisely. Michael, you've been wonderful today. I want to thank you very much for coming here and giving us such great information. I want to thank everybody in the audience for spending a little time with us here today. If you want to catch the next installment of Risk at Work, please go to riskconnect.com and sign up for our updates so make sure that you don't miss this wonderful information by speakers like Michael Rasmussen. And also, we have something new for you at riskconnect.com. If you go there, you can download The Hunt for Hidden Risks, which is RiskConnect's brand new white paper. This is a compendium of the entire wisdom of all of the speakers from Risk at Work. So we went back through the couple of years that we've been doing this and distilled all of the messages from all of the speakers into a reference so that we could keep that wisdom near to us. And it's all through the lens of finding and mitigating and keeping out the most opaque risks, the most insidious risks in your organization. So a lot of work went into it. I hope you find it very valuable. For those of you who are Tim Ferriss fans, this would be like the tools of titans of the risk and GRC world. Michael is quoted at length in The Hunt for Hidden Risks. So download that today. I really hope you enjoy it and you get value from that. If you sent us questions today, if we wanted to get an answer from Michael and we didn't get an answer to your question during the course of our talk today, we watch your inbox. We will reach out to you directly with an answer to your question from Michael. And also, one more time, if you suggested that you wanted CPE credit after this presentation was over, we will send you an email. It's got a short quiz in it. Fill it out, send it right back to us. We will follow up with your CPE credit. If you are looking for the type of technology that Michael was mentioning during the course of this talk today, this technology that is central to third-party agility and resiliency and is going to be even more central to it in the future, please reach out to RiskConnect. Reach out to a RiskConnect representative. We would love to talk to you about your business and your needs and your goals for the future and get you hooked up with a platform that's going to serve your third-party needs, not just now, but years and years from now. So please reach out to us if that is interesting to you. Michael, normally I'm asking how people can keep up with what you're doing, but you've done such a great job of displaying your contact information there. I will urge people to go to grc2020.com, sign up for your newsletter. I'm a subscriber to the GRC 2020 newsletter, and it is packed full of wonderful information always. So that's it for us today. Thank you so much for joining. We'll see you for the next installment of Risk at Work. Take care.